On the day my husband was laid to rest, my stepson offered no comfort. Just 3 months later, he showed up at my door, called me a burden, sold our family company out from under me, and told me to find a new home. But I simply smiled. He had no idea he'd just handed me the capital for my greatest revenge. Stick around to hear how I went from grieving widow to unstoppable force. And don't forget to like, share, and let me know where you are listening from. The low growl of Arthur's BMW was an unwelcome intruder in the quiet afternoon, a sound Eleanor had grown to dread. 3 months had passed since George's funeral. 3 months of a silence that was both a heavy blanket of grief and a fragile shield against the world. She hadn't seen or heard from Arthur, George's son, since the wake, and a part of her had foolishly hoped that perhaps he would simply forget her existence now that his father was gone. But the purr of the engine, followed by the crunch of tires on her gravel driveway, shattered that illusion. Trouble, she knew instinctively, had just pulled up to her door. She watched from the living room window as Arthur, tall and impeccably dressed, emerged from the car. Beside him, Serena, his wife, adjusted her immaculate suit. They both carried an air of crisp, cold impatience. Their faces set in expressions that offered no warmth, no sympathy for the grieving widow. Serena clutched a sleek leather briefcase to her chest, almost like a shield or a weapon. A gust of wind carried the heavy scent of Serena's expensive perfume through the open window, a cloying sweetness that made Eleanor's head ache. It was always a little too much, too artificial, much like Serena herself. Eleanor met them at the door, forcing a polite smile onto her lips. "Arthur. Serena. Please, come in." She gestured towards the living room, trying to project an air of normalcy, of a social visit. "Can I offer you some coffee? Or perhaps tea?" Arthur stepped inside, barely glancing at her. "No, thank you, Eleanor," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any genuine courtesy. "This isn't a social visit." The words hung in the air, cold and blunt, confirming Eleanor's worst fears. They took seats opposite her on the elegant antique sofas George had loved, Serena placing the briefcase carefully on the coffee table between them. Her fingers remained on it, possessive. Arthur wasted no time with pleasantries. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "The company is sold, Eleanor." The words hit her like a physical blow, even though a part of her had been bracing for something like this. Her breath hitched. "Sold?" she whispered, the single word thick with disbelief. "The company. George's legacy. Their life's work." Serena, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips, reached for the briefcase. She unlatched it with a practiced click, revealing a stack of documents. "The sale was finalized yesterday," she announced, pulling out a thick folder and placing it on the table. "All the paperwork is in order." Eleanor felt a surge of indignant anger. "But I'm still the majority shareholder," she protested, her voice gaining strength despite the tremor in her hands. "How could you sell it without my consent?" Arthur sighed, a sound of weary exasperation. "Eleanor, let's be realistic. You're 80 years old. You haven't been actively involved in the day-to-day operations for years, not since George retired, and certainly not since." He trailed off, gesturing vaguely towards the recent past, the implication of George's death hanging unspoken. "Your lack of involvement simply isn't conducive to running a modern business." Serena chimed in, her voice dripping with thinly veiled condescension. "Honestly, Eleanor, with all due respect, it's not just the company. We've heard you're struggling to manage your own household lately, forgetting appointments, misplacing things." She didn't quite say senile, but the insinuation was clear. A cruel, unnecessary jab at Eleanor's personal life. "The company needs young, dynamic leadership," Arthur continued, ignoring his wife's unnecessary commentary but tacitly endorsing it. "Someone who can navigate the current market. You're struggling, Eleanor. We both know it." Eleanor felt a burning heat in her cheeks, but she held her tongue, a strange sense of quiet beginning to settle over her. She knew what they were doing. They were systematically dismantling her, justifying their actions by painting her as an incapable, fading old woman. "We did manage to get a good price," Arthur said, as if offering a consolation prize. $2.8 million. He paused, letting the figure sink in. After taxes, your share comes out to approximately $1.9 million. The number was staggering, far more than Eleanor had anticipated. It was an enormous sum, more than enough to secure her future many times over. Yet, it felt hollow, tainted by the betrayal. "Why wasn't I consulted?" she asked again, her voice steadier this time. "As a majority shareholder, I should have been part of this decision." Arthur leaned back, a hint of impatience flickering in his eyes. "I'm consulting you now, Eleanor," he said, his tone bordering on mockery. "I'm asking you to acknowledge that the sale was in your best interest. Financially, it's a very sound move for you." He then delivered the final, crushing blow, his voice devoid of any warmth or familial affection. "To be frank, Eleanor, you've been nothing but a burden since Dad died. A financial and emotional drain. This frees you. And us." Eleanor felt something crack inside her. It wasn't a breaking, not a shattering of her spirit as they undoubtedly intended. Instead, it felt like a thawing, a release from the icy grip of grief and naive trust. The pain was still there, sharp and vivid, but beneath it, a strange clarity began to emerge. Their cruelty, their utter lack of empathy, stripped away any lingering illusions she might have had about Arthur and Serena. The silence that followed Arthur's words was profound, punctuated only by the distant chirping of birds outside. Arthur, mistaking her silence for resignation, pressed on, his voice softening with a false, saccharine concern. "This house, it's far too much for you to manage now. Too expensive, too big. Good luck with the rent on your new apartment, Eleanor." The subtle menace in his tone was unmistakable. He wasn't just suggesting she move. He was telling her this was the first step. Eleanor looked at the papers, then at Arthur, then at Serena's smug face. A profound calm settled over her. The battle, she realized, wasn't here. Not now. Her fight was not with these small-minded people in this moment. She picked up the pen Serena had placed on the table, her hand steady. "Okay," Eleanor said, her voice surprisingly even, almost serene. She signed the papers with a flourish, her signature firm and clear. She pushed the documents back towards Serena. "Good luck," she added, her eyes meeting Arthur's, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. Then, as an afterthought, she looked towards the window, gazing out at the late afternoon sun. "I've always wanted to see Milan." The silence that descended upon the house after Arthur's BMW pulled away was profound, yet entirely different from the quiet that had settled after George's passing. That had been a silence of grief, heavy and all-encompassing. This new quiet was one of stark clarity, of resolve. The air, which had felt thick and cloying with Serena's perfume and Arthur's condescension, now felt clean, almost vibrant. Eleanor walked through the rooms, touching the familiar surfaces, a faint smile playing on her lips. It was done. The first move had been made, not by her, but by them. She picked up the phone, her fingers steady as she dialed. "David," she said when he answered, her voice calm. "They came. It's done. I'll be right over." David replied instantly, his voice carrying the warmth of a long friendship. He was her attorney, but more importantly, he was one of the few people who truly understood the intricate tapestry of her life with George. True to his word, David arrived within the hour, his kind eyes already crinkling with a knowing smile. He sat in the very same armchair Arthur had occupied, but the atmosphere was entirely different. There was comfort, shared understanding, and a hint of shared anticipation in the air. "So, he went through with it then," David stated. Not a question, but a confirmation. He had been preparing for this day for years. As had Eleanor. Eleanor nodded, pouring them both a cup of tea this time. "Oh, yes. And he called me a burden, David. Can you believe it? A burden since George died." She chuckled softly, a dry, mirthless sound. "It used to hurt, you know, their petty cruelties, their dismissive attitudes. But I suppose I'm past being surprised by it now. It just solidified things." David nodded slowly, stirring his tea. "It always does, doesn't it? The true colors always come out in the end." He set his cup down. Shall we review the timeline then? Our timeline. That is, Eleanor settled back, a flicker of something akin to satisfaction in her eyes. Let's. It all began, didn't it, when Arthur first came to work for George, even before George's illness was fully diagnosed. We started laying the groundwork right after George's funeral. The first one anyway. 3 years ago. She leaned forward, her gaze distant, recalling the past. George and I, we started this company back in 1983. We were practically broke, living in a tiny apartment above a bakery. But we had ideas, David. Big ideas, and the drive to make them happen. She smiled fondly. George was the charmer. The public face. He could walk into any room and captivate investors, make them believe in our vision. He loved that part. The spotlight. And you, David interjected, were the engine behind the curtain. The strategist. The numbers person. The one who actually built the vision into a viable business. Eleanor nodded. Exactly. Officially, George owned 60% of the company, and I owned 40%. That was important for George's ego. He needed to feel like the head, the patriarch, but the real power, the true control, lay in the intricate web of subsidiary companies and trusts we meticulously built over the decades, layers upon layers, each one reinforcing the other, each one designed to protect our true assets. David tapped his pen on his notepad. And that brings us to the Meridian Trust, doesn't it? The one we established when Arthur joined the company, under the guise of an executive compensation fund, if I recall correctly. Eleanor's smile widened, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Ah, the Meridian Trust. My little masterpiece. That's where 70% of the company's actual value was transferred, David. Not the superficial shares, but the real meat and bones. The patents, the international contracts, the valuable real estate holdings. Everything that made the company truly valuable. And I, as you recall, am the sole beneficiary. Arthur, of course, David mused, knew nothing of this. Nothing, Eleanor confirmed. He was so eager to prove himself, to show George he was a worthy successor, that he never bothered to look past the surface. He saw the official shareholding, he saw my name on certain documents, and he simply assumed I was a figurehead. An old woman, past her prime, easily manipulated. She recalled a conversation she'd overheard a year ago, Arthur talking to Serena in hushed tones. I remember him telling Serena I was clueless about the financials. He actually used those words. Clueless. It was quite amusing. Actually, she leaned back, a wistful expression crossing her face. I let them underestimate me, David. I had to. George needed to feel successful, to believe he was still in control, even as his health faded. And Arthur needed to feel like he was rescuing me, taking charge, stepping into his father's shoes. It was easier for everyone if they thought I was a sweet, slightly bewildered old lady who signed whatever was put in front of her. A shadow crossed her face, a brief flash of sorrow. Before George passed, he looked at me, really looked at me, and made me promise. David, he said, Eleanor, don't let Arthur take advantage of your kindness. Not with everything we built. He knew. He always knew. She took a slow sip of her tea, the warmth comforting her. So, what Arthur sold today, she said, her voice dropping to a low, confident tone, was merely the shell, the public-facing entity, with its limited assets, its visible contracts, and its operational debt. It was only 30% of the company's actual value. He sold that for $2.8 million. She paused, letting the numbers resonate. And the holdings within the Meridian Trust, the true treasure chest, those are worth $9.2 million. The Meridian Trust, Eleanor explained to David, a glint in her eyes, holds assets that Arthur never even knew existed, let alone appreciated. $4 million in cutting-edge patents, the intellectual property that truly defines our innovations. Another $3.5 million in prime commercial properties across 3 different continents, secured through shell companies Arthur wouldn't even begin to trace. And, of course, all our exclusive international distribution rights, the ones that actually make the company profitable beyond our local market. She shook her head, a faint, almost pitying smile on her lips. He truly believed I was clueless. Arthur always dismissed my understanding of modern business, always assuming that because I wasn't tweeting or posting about it, I wasn't involved. Eleanor recalled the previous Christmas, a strained affair where Arthur had been particularly insufferable. I remember him at Christmas, she recounted, lecturing me about staying current, about how I was living in the past, completely out of touch with the new world of commerce. Serena just sat there, nodding along, adding her own little jabs about my quaint lifestyle. What they didn't know, she continued, her voice gaining a steely edge, was that while Arthur was busy consolidating the public-facing aspects of the company, I was quietly closing 3 new international distribution deals in Southeast Asia and Europe, and with the help of a brilliant young inventor, I managed to increase our patent portfolio by 40%. The real value, the future of the company, was always hidden in plain sight. Right under their noses, David leaned back, a mixture of admiration and professional respect on his face. So, what's the next step, Eleanor? I assume you've thought about that. Oh, I have, Eleanor confirmed, her gaze hardening. Arthur and Serena have already departed for Milan. They're staying in the presidential suite at the Grand Hotel de Milan, a rather lavish booking, wouldn't you agree? Indeed, David murmured, sensing the underlying current. That suite, Eleanor clarified, was booked using funds from an account Arthur believes is his inheritance, the same account where the proceeds from his sale were supposed to land. Unfortunately for him, that account will show a zero balance when he tries to access it. She paused, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. I anticipate 53 calls from Arthur. An estimate, of course. Could be more. David's brow furrowed slightly. Eleanor, I understand your feelings. Truly. But this will burn the bridge completely. There will be no coming back from this with Arthur. Eleanor met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. David, I lost my son the day he decided I was a burden, the day he chose greed and disrespect over familial affection. That bridge was incinerated long ago. This isn't about reconciliation. This is about dignity. Mine. David nodded slowly, a knowing look passing between them. He stood to leave. A silent understanding hanging in the air. Call me when you're ready for the next phase, Eleanor. After David left, the house felt quiet again, but this time, it was a charged, expectant quiet. Eleanor felt a surge of energy she hadn't experienced in years. She reached for the phone again, dialing a number she hadn't called in a long time. Olivia, Eleanor began, her voice firm and clear. It's Eleanor. I have a proposition for you. A new company, a fresh start. And I need a CEO who isn't afraid to shake things up. She outlined her plans, speaking with the authority and vision that had once built an empire. As she spoke, she felt the familiar stirrings of her true self. The woman who had always been the strategic mastermind. The silent force behind George's success. The grief for George was still a dull ache, but the fog of sadness was lifting, replaced by the sharp, invigorating air of purpose. She felt alive again. She set the phone down, looking at the clock. It was nearly 3 a.m. here. Milan, she knew, would be just waking up. She imagined Arthur, still ensconced in his presidential suite, perhaps ordering an espresso, ready to start his day as the new, wealthy patriarch. The thought brought a genuine, unburdened smile to her face. The first call came precisely at 9:47 a.m. Milan time, which translated to 2:47 a.m. for Eleanor. Her phone, usually silent in the pre-dawn hours, vibrated aggressively on her bedside table. She looked at the caller ID. Arthur. She let it ring, the insistent buzz a small, private victory. It rang again. And again. By the 6th call, the phone was practically dancing across the polished wood of her nightstand. She picked it up, her voice sleepy, as if roused from a deep slumber. Hello? Eleanor. Arthur's voice was strained, laced with a barely concealed panic. There's been a A technical issue with the bank accounts. The funds from the sale, they're not there. It's showing a zero balance. Eleanor feigned a yawn. Oh, Arthur, dear. At this hour? Are you sure you're looking at the right account? Sometimes these things are tricky. She paused, letting the implication hang. Have you called the bank? They're usually very helpful with these sorts of things. She knew, of course, that he had, and she knew exactly what they had told him. The account was closed. The bank says the account is closed, Eleanor. Arthur's voice, usually so clipped and controlled, was now strained, a thin tremor running beneath the words. His carefully constructed composure was cracking. Eleanor made another soft, sleepy sound. Closed? Oh dear, how unusual. Are you sure, Arthur? Sometimes banks do funny things with old accounts. Perhaps they merged it with another one? So confusing. All these numbers. She kept up her persona, the slightly bewildered, ignorant mother, letting him think she was still the easy mark. In the background, Serena's voice, sharp and demanding, cut through the phone line. Tell her to fix it, Arthur. Now. What is wrong with her? They say it's been closed for months. Arthur fumed, ignoring Serena. You need to call David. There's been a mistake with the paperwork. A huge mistake. David? Eleanor feigned surprise. Goodness, Arthur, it's 3 a.m. here. David will be fast asleep. This can surely wait until business hours, can't it? It's just money, after all. Just money? Arthur's voice exploded, the veneer of patience completely gone. Eleanor, we're stranded in Milan. Our credit cards are all maxed out. And this presidential suite, this incredibly expensive suite that you booked for us, is completely unpaid. We have no access to funds. What do you expect us to do? Eleanor made a sympathetic clicking sound with her tongue. Oh, dear. Stranded. That sounds rather unpleasant. But you always carry emergency cash, don't you, Arthur? George always insisted on it. For unexpected contingencies, you know. Arthur's voice dropped to a dangerous low, a venomous hiss that chilled the air. Eleanor, I am telling you, you need to call David right now and find out where our money is. This isn't a game. Your money? Eleanor questioned, her voice still calm, but a subtle shift in tone, a barely perceptible sharpening of the edges. Which money are you referring to, Arthur? The money from the sale, he roared. The $2.8 million. My inheritance. The company was sold. The funds were supposed to be transferred into the account. Where is it? Eleanor paused, a beat of silence stretching between them. Then, in a voice that was perfectly even, devoid of emotion, she said, Oh, that money? Yes, I know exactly where that is. Arthur let out a ragged breath, a sound of relief and exasperation. Thank God. So you'll transfer it? What was the mistake? The bank said the account was dormant for too long and transferred the funds somewhere else. Perhaps he was clutching at straws, desperate for a logical explanation. It's in my account. Eleanor delivered the bombshell, the words dropping into the silence with the precision of a perfectly timed theatrical moment. A stunned silence followed, so profound that Eleanor could almost hear Arthur's mind trying to process the information, struggling to compute the impossible. Then, the explosion came. What the hell are you talking about, Eleanor? Arthur's voice was a primal scream of rage and disbelief. I sold the company. My company. The company Dad left me. You sold a company, Arthur. Eleanor corrected him, her voice cool and measured, each word a precise cut. You sold about 30% of George Industries. What we like to call the shell. Now Serena's voice was audible, frantic and confused. The shell? What is she talking about, Arthur? What shell? Eleanor, stop playing games, Arthur bellowed, his voice trembling with fury. This isn't funny. You're going senile. Give me back my money. No games, Arthur, Eleanor said, a hint of steel entering her tone now. You sold the company name. You sold the daily operations, the office lease, the existing payroll, and the furniture. All the tangible, visible aspects that you thought constituted George Industries. All the things that were, technically, Yours to sell. She paused, letting that sink in. But the assets, Arthur? She continued, her voice gaining an undeniable power. The patents, the international contracts, the lucrative real estate holdings, the manufacturing rights for our most profitable lines. Oh, dear boy, those were never yours. Those were always mine. If you're finding this story as gripping as I am, make sure to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you don't miss the next twist. There's so much more to come. A loud clatter echoed through the phone line, the sound of Arthur dropping the receiver, or perhaps just his own carefully constructed world. Eleanor pictured him, face paling, eyes wide, as the full, devastating scope of her quiet scheme finally dawned on him. Then, Serena's voice, sharp and furious, tore through the silence. She must have snatched the phone up. You conniving old witch. You can't just claim ownership of assets that rightfully belong to him. Those are Arthur's, his inheritance. Eleanor remained unruffled. Oh, Serena, dear. Did you happen to review the Meridian Trust documents before advising your husband to sell the company? Or perhaps the Patterson Holdings subsidiary agreements? Or indeed, any of the detailed intellectual property assignments George and I painstakingly put in place over the years? The ensuing silence was deafening, confirming everything Eleanor already knew. Serena, like Arthur, had been too consumed by the prospect of easy wealth to delve into the intricate legal architecture that protected the true value of George Industries. No, I thought not. Eleanor continued, her voice steady and clear. You see, Serena, I spent 40 years of my life building that business alongside George, 40 years of sleepless nights, strategic planning, and careful asset protection. It would be rather foolish of me to simply hand it over to someone who saw me as nothing more than a burden. Wouldn't it? Arthur's voice returned, no longer booming with anger, but trembling with a chilling mix of fear and desperation. Mom, Eleanor, please, you can't do this. I'm your son, we're family. The plea was pathetic, a transparent attempt to invoke a bond he had long since severed. Eleanor allowed herself a small, mirthless chuckle. Family? Is that what you remember now, Arthur? Because family is why you called me a burden. Family is why you sold my life's work out from under me without a single word of consultation. Family is why you expected me to simply fade away and let you pick clean the bones of what George and I built. She paused, letting her words sink in. Did you truly think I was so senile that I wouldn't know what you were planning? That I wouldn't protect myself? I wasn't planning anything, Arthur blubbered, the sound of his distress growing. I was trying to help you, Mom. You were struggling. You told me yourself you wanted to retire. Oh, you were trying to help me, were you? Eleanor retorted, a cutting edge to her voice. Or were you trying to help yourself to what you thought was an easy inheritance, unencumbered by an inconvenient old woman who might ask questions? Serena snatched the phone back, her voice shrill with indignation. This is elder abuse. We'll sue you. We'll expose you for the manipulative old hag you are. Eleanor actually laughed then. A genuine, full-throated laugh that carried across the thousands of miles between them. With what money, dear? And which lawyers? Are you perhaps forgetting your current predicament in Milan, the one where you're currently without funds, facing an unpaid presidential suite bill, and certainly no means to pay for international legal counsel? A choked sound came from Arthur in the background, a gasp of dawning horror. I'll call Dad's old business partners. Arthur vowed, his voice regaining a flicker of its usual bluster, despite his sobs. They'll help me. They won't let you get away with this. Oh, Arthur, Eleanor said, shaking her head. Always so predictable. Do you really think George and I didn't plan for every contingency? Those old business partners, as you call them, will find that all their contracts with George Industries are now null and void, having been tied to the shell you so readily sold off. They're actually in negotiations right now with Meridian Trust to re-establish those connections under new terms. Terms, I might add, that are far more favorable to me. The line went silent again, a heavier, more definitive silence this time. Then, through the faint crackle, Eleanor heard Arthur's voice, broken and defeated, the sound of a man utterly stripped bare. You planned this. You planned all of this. Eleanor allowed herself a small, sad sigh. I prepared for it, Arthur. There's a difference. I had hoped, truly, that you would value our relationship more than what you thought you could take from me. I had hoped that you would be a man worthy of George's legacy. How long? Arthur whispered, his voice barely audible. How long have you known? How long have you been doing this? Eleanor looked at the clock, the faint glow of the digital numbers marking the passage of time. 3 years, Arthur, she answered truthfully, her voice unwavering. Since the week after your father's funeral. 3 years, Arthur repeated, the words hollow, echoing with a dawning horror. Eleanor could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the slow, agonizing realization that he hadn't been clever or cunning, but a pawn in a game he hadn't even known was being played. 3 years of believing he was in control. 3 years of underestimating the woman he thought was a simple, aging widow. Serena's frantic voice broke through. Eleanor, this isn't fair. We're stuck in Milan. What are we supposed to do? Eleanor allowed herself a small, sarcastic sigh. Oh, Serena, dear, I'm sure a man of Arthur's immense business acumen, paired with your impeccable organizational skills, will figure out this little problem. After all, you're both so incredibly competent, aren't you? Then, Arthur's voice returned, raw and stripped of all pretense. Mom, please, I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. How do I fix this? For a fleeting moment, a maternal tug, a ghost of the affection she once held for George's son, pulled at Eleanor's heart, but then the echo of his words, a burden, resonated, sharp and cold, extinguishing any flicker of sympathy. She remembered George's face, his final plea to protect what they had built. Arthur, she said, her voice firm, you wanted to prove your independence. You wanted to take control, so you figure out how to get home from Milan without my help. Consider it a lesson in self-reliance. You're abandoning us, he cried, the accusation thick with self-pity. No, Arthur, Eleanor corrected him softly. I'm letting you experience what independence feels like. What it feels like to stand on your own 2 feet, without the safety net George and I always provided. His voice was small now, utterly defeated. What happens now? Eleanor took a deep breath, the taste of vindication mingling with a quiet sadness for what could have been. Now, Arthur, you learn what I've always known. Family isn't just about blood, it's about respect. And respect isn't something you inherit, Arthur. It's something you earn. She hung up, a sense of finality settling over her. That was call number 13. 40 more. She predicted. She pushed the phone aside and returned to her work. The real work. The work of running the company she and George had truly built. Olivia was already making calls, setting up meetings, buzzing with renewed purpose. By noon, her phone showed 37 missed calls. The messages in her voicemail progressed from furious demands to increasingly desperate pleas, interspersed with Serena's shrill denunciations. Eleanor listened to them all, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. At exactly 2:30 in the afternoon, while she was outside, pruning the overgrown roses that had been neglected since George's passing, her phone rang again. Call number 38, she answered, the scent of fresh earth and rose petals filling the air. Eleanor. Arthur's voice was hoarse, thick with exhaustion and anger. We're coming home. Face to face. Oh, Eleanor replied, snipping a dead head from a vibrant crimson rose. And how do you intend to pay for that, Arthur? Still no funds, I presume? Uncle Richard is wiring us money for the tickets, he spat, as if the very act of asking for help was a deep humiliation. Eleanor could just imagine the story Arthur had spun for his unsuspecting uncle, painting her as the vindictive old woman, robbing her helpless stepson. A familiar pang of exasperation for his ingrained entitlement pricked at her. And when you get here, Arthur continued, his voice gaining a dangerous edge, I will fight this legally. I will protect Dad's legacy. You won't get away with this. Eleanor paused her pruning, straightening up. George's legacy? She echoed, a sharp bitterness in her tone. Arthur, We built George Industries from nothing. Not just George. We started with 2 hands and an idea, and I am protecting it, Arthur. From you." She leaned closer to the phone, her voice dropping to a serious, unyielding tone. "You want to know why I'm doing this? Your buyer, Stewart Industries, they weren't interested in growth or innovation. They planned to strip the assets, fire every last one of our loyal employees, and move the entire operation to Mexico. 43 families, Arthur, 43 families would have been out of work, their lives uprooted, all for your quick cash grab. That, my dear, is not what George would have wanted. And it is certainly not what I will allow." The silence on the line after Eleanor revealed Stewart Industries' true intentions was far more potent than any of Arthur's previous outbursts. It was a silence of shock, of a terrible dawning comprehension that his actions had consequences far beyond his own perceived gain. He had seen the employees as mere numbers, easily replaced or discarded. Eleanor had forced him to see the faces behind those numbers. "Margaret, in accounting," Eleanor continued, her voice soft but steady. "She's been with us for 25 years. Her son just started college, and Tom, in product development, he's a single father supporting 2 young children. Did you consider them, Arthur, when you shook hands with Stewart Industries? Or were they just collateral damage in your pursuit of progress?" Arthur finally broke the silence, his voice tight. "Business isn't charity, Mom. Sometimes people get hurt. It's the way of the world." "No, Arthur," Eleanor countered, her voice hardening. "Business is about creating value, providing livelihoods, and building something sustainable. It's not pillaging. It's not about destroying everything for a quick buck, especially when that everything was built on the backs of loyal employees and the dreams of your father." "We'll be home tomorrow," Arthur stated, the defeat momentarily giving way to a renewed sense of aggression. "And we'll settle this properly, face to face, with our lawyers." Eleanor expected nothing less. He would hire the most expensive attorneys he could find, determined to challenge the validity of the trust and reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. She felt no fear, only a quiet determination. She hung up and immediately called David. "They're coming home tomorrow," she informed him. "And yes, they're threatening legal action." "I figured as much," David said calmly. "Richard just called me, quite distressed." Arthur painted quite a picture. "I'm sure he did," Eleanor replied dryly. "Now, David, I need you to pull something for me. All the video files, the board meetings, the family dinners, the conversations George and I had in his office when Arthur thought we were just discussing our daily schedule. Everything." David paused. "Eleanor, what exactly are we talking about here?" "I've been recording, David," she explained, a wry twist to her lips. "For the past 3 years. Discreetly, of course, documenting Arthur's attempts to undermine me, to push me out, to convince me that I was no longer capable. His subtle comments, his patronizing suggestions, his private conversations with Serena about how to manage my supposed decline." She recounted specific instances. "Remember that board meeting where Arthur suggested I transition to an advisory role because he was concerned about my memory? Or the Christmas dinner where he and Serena strategized in the kitchen about how to gently persuade me to sell my shares? All recorded, David. And most importantly," she continued, her voice filled with a quiet triumph, "George's responses. His firm defense of me as the true strategic mind of the company. His assurances that I was running circles around most CEOs half my age. His trust in my judgment, even when he himself was ill. Arthur's greatest weakness," Eleanor mused aloud to David, "has always been his inability to see past his own assumptions. He's never expected much from me. And that, David, was his undoing." After the call, Eleanor settled into her study, surrounded by the glowing screens of her computer. She opened the latest financial reports for the Meridian Trust, the true heart of George Industries. The numbers flashed, vibrant and promising. The international expansion in Germany, the new contracts in Japan, the patents for the groundbreaking new software suite. All of it documented, all of it growing. Arthur thought he had sold an empire for $2.8 million. The truth was, The empire, the one that truly mattered, was now worth well over $15 million. And it was all hers. A ping from her phone startled her. A text message. From Serena. This isn't over. You've made the biggest mistake of your life. Eleanor smiled faintly. She typed out a reply, her fingers moving with a decisive grace. The biggest mistake of my life was letting you into my family. I'm correcting that now. She paused, considering, then added another, more contemplative message. Good. Maybe now we can have an honest relationship. The doorbell chimed precisely at the agreed-upon time, but Arthur and Serena were nowhere in sight. 12 minutes later, a frantic pounding announced their arrival. They stood on her porch, disheveled and desperate, the expensive clothes they wore from Milan now wrinkled and travel-stained. Arthur's face was drawn, his eyes bloodshot, while Serena's makeup was smudged, her hair escaping its perfect coiffure. The air of crisp impatience they'd carried on their last visit was gone, replaced by an aura of utter panic. Eleanor opened the door, a serene expression on her face. Arthur. Serena. Do come in. She led them into the living room, a space that now felt entirely hers, where the dynamic had irrevocably reversed. She sat in her usual armchair, while they perched on the edge of the sofa, clearly uncomfortable. Arthur, despite his obvious distress, tried to project an air of authority. My lawyer will be contesting the trust, Eleanor. This is absurd. You can't just take everything. Eleanor merely smiled, a thin, knowing curve of her lips. He's welcome to try. Arthur, but I assure you, David and I spent 30 years meticulously documenting every single transfer, every patent assignment, every corporate restructure. It's all perfectly legal, perfectly sound. 30 years of preparation tends to cover all the legal bases. Serena's composure finally snapped. Her voice was shrill, tinged with hysteria. You can't do this to us. I quit my job, Eleanor. We bought a new house. Based on what we thought you were going to give us, you quit your job? Eleanor raised an eyebrow, a hint of disdain in her voice. And you purchased a house based on a presumption of what you were going to inherit? Rather than what you had actually earned or legally secured? That, Serena, sounds like rather poor financial planning on your part. You stole it, Arthur roared, losing all semblance of control. His face was blotchy, his hands clenched into fists. You stole what was rightfully mine. My inheritance, my father's legacy. Eleanor calmly reached for a file on the side table. Your father's legacy is here, Arthur. She opened the file, revealing George's original will. As per George's last will and testament, you inherited 60% of George Industries, as it was legally constituted at the time of his death. She emphasized the last phrase, watching as a flicker of confusion crossed Arthur's face. Then, she produced another document. Neatly folded, and here, she continued, her voice soft but firm, is an amendment, signed by George himself, acknowledging that the most valuable assets of George Industries, the patents, the international contracts, the real estate, were transferred to separate, independent entities, primarily the Meridian Trust, with me as the sole beneficiary. Serena gasped, her eyes wide with incredulity. But those were company assets. How could he just sign them over to you? They were my assets, Serena. Eleanor corrected her, her gaze unwavering. Developed, funded, and managed by me. George was the public face, yes. But the intellectual property, the strategic investments, the growth into international markets, that was my domain. We merely structured it in a way that allowed George to feel like the primary owner. A slow, terrible understanding dawned in Arthur's eyes. He whispered, his voice barely audible. You planned this. You planned this, from the very beginning. I protected what I built, Arthur, Eleanor clarified. The distinction crucial. She then reached for a small, sleek device on the table. You know, it's interesting what one can overhear when people assume you're not paying attention, or when they simply don't care if you do. She pressed a button. Arthur and Serena heard Arthur's own voice, clear as day, discussing Eleanor with Serena. She's completely clueless about the financials, Serena. Just sign the papers. My scattered mother won't even notice. It'll be so easy. Serena's eyes widened in horror, turning to Arthur, a look of betrayal etched on her face. Before she could speak, Eleanor played another snippet. This time, it was Arthur's voice talking to George. She's just confused, Dad. She's not thinking clearly about the business anymore. Her memory, it's not what it once was. Then, George's voice, strong and clear from the recording, resonated through the room. Arthur. Eleanor is the strategic mind of this company. She's running circles around most CEOs half her age. She built this with me, and she'll protect it long after I'm gone. Don't you ever underestimate her. Serena stared at Arthur, her face a mask of furious disbelief. You lied to me. You told me she was senile. You told me she had dementia. Is this why you haven't been answering her calls, Eleanor? Because he told me you were too far gone to even know what was happening. Eleanor met Serena's gaze. I do not, nor have I ever had dementia, Serena. I have been perfectly lucid, perfectly aware. For every single moment of the past 3 years. Without another word, Serena sprang from the sofa, grabbing her crumpled handbag. I want a divorce, Arthur, she spat, her voice laced with venom, and I'm taking everything I can get. She stormed out of the house, the front door slamming shut behind her. Arthur slumped back into the sofa, utterly broken, his face buried in his hands. The silence was thick, heavy with the weight of his unraveling world. Finally, he looked up at Eleanor, his eyes hollow. What do you want from me? Mom. Eleanor looked at him, her heart aching with a complex mix of sorrow and resolve. I want you, Arthur, she said, her voice soft but unwavering, to decide whether you truly love me, or if you just loved what you thought I could give you. The heavy thud of the front door announcing Serena's departure was followed by a stunned silence from Arthur. A few agonizing minutes later, he rose, his shoulders slumped, and without a word, walked out the door and down the driveway. A broken man. Eleanor watched him go, a hollow ache in her chest. It was a victory, yes, but a costly one. 20 minutes later, her phone rang. It was Arthur. His voice was small, hesitant. Mom. Serena. She threw me out. I have nowhere to go. Can I stay with you? Eleanor paused. The spare room stood empty. You can, she said, her voice even. For $50 a night. And you'll be responsible for your share of the housework. Starting with the kitchen. $50, Arthur protested, a flicker of his old entitlement returning. Mom, I don't have any money. Serena cleaned out our joint account. Then you'll learn to earn some, Arthur. Eleanor replied, her voice firm. Consider it an education in personal responsibility. Something you seem to have missed. He hung up without another word. She expected him to try other avenues, to cling to some last vestige of his former life, but to her surprise, he arrived at her doorstep later that night, a single duffel bag in hand, a humility she had never seen before, etched onto his face. He began to earn his keep, slowly, awkwardly at first. Then, with a growing diligence, 6 months passed. The sun streamed into Eleanor's kitchen, illuminating a spotlessly clean counter. Arthur, dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, meticulously wiped down the table after they finished their morning coffee. The bitter, entitled man who had arrived at her door was gone, replaced by a quieter, more thoughtful individual. His hands, once soft from corporate life, were now calloused from scrubbing floors and tending the garden. The German partnership is exceeding projections, Arthur reported, his tone professional, yet tinged with genuine enthusiasm. And the Tokyo expansion is right on track. Olivia's doing excellent work. He paused, looking at Eleanor. She's really quite brilliant. Isn't she? Eleanor smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through her. She is. And so are you, Arthur, when you apply yourself. The transformation had been slow. Arduous even. He had tried to fight her, tried to find legal loopholes, slept on friends' couches, convinced someone would ride to his rescue. But eventually, humbled and with nowhere else to turn, he had returned, ready to follow her rules, to learn the business from the very bottom. He started by working in the mailroom of the shell company, then moved to inventory management, and gradually, through Eleanor's quiet guidance and his own rediscovered work ethic, began to truly understand the operational side of the business. "Today," Eleanor said, setting down her cup, "I'd like you to join me for the meeting with the Henderson Group. They're a notoriously difficult client, but a crucial one. I want you to observe, learn how we negotiate, how we build relationships." Arthur's eyes lit up, a spark of genuine interest that was a stark contrast to his past indifference. "Really? That would be great, Mom. I've actually been doing some research on them, their corporate culture, their market challenges. I have some ideas." Eleanor felt a surge of pride, a deeper, more satisfying emotion than any financial gain. "Good," she said simply. "Show me what you've got." Arthur hesitated, then looked at her, his gaze clear and honest. "You know, when I first came back here, it was out of desperation. I hated you. I hated what you did to me. But I've realized something. What I thought was mine was never really mine to begin with. Dad built a company, yes, but you built an empire. And I never saw it because I was too busy trying to tear it down." He sighed, a heavy sound of regret. "I wasted 35 years trying to live up to some false image of George, the great businessman. I thought strength meant never admitting you were wrong, never asking for help. But George was successful because he married someone smarter than him and was humble enough to listen. He saw your genius, Mom. And I was too arrogant, too blinded by my own ego, to ever see it. I'm truly sorry. For everything." Just then, Eleanor's phone rang. It was Serena. Eleanor put it on speaker, a knowing look passing between her and Arthur. "Eleanor," Serena's voice, surprisingly subdued, came through the speaker. I just wanted to apologize. For everything. I was entitled. I was greedy. I truly believed what Arthur told me about you. I filed for divorce this morning, and I'm not asking for a penny. He can keep it all." Eleanor ended the call, looking at Arthur. He sat in silence for a moment, then let out a long breath. I feel relieved. Truly relieved." He met Eleanor's gaze, a tentative smile on his lips. I think I'm finally becoming someone George would have been proud of." Eleanor reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "Respect, Arthur," she said softly, "is earned, not inherited. And a mother's love isn't just about protecting her children from failure. Sometimes, it's about letting them fall, so they can finally learn to stand on their own and truly succeed."